You're taking the
vaccinations.
kids to
So
Asia.
then so it's summer holidays. So I'm like, am I just going to sit with the kids for 2 weeks
Yeah.
at home going
Right.
crazy? Or am I just going to go, we're live, by the way, or am I just going to go and take them somewhere where for not very much money, we can eat
Right.
good food, they can play at the pool, and I can. So this is all a preface to saying this is why I'm embarrassed about the fact that I'm going to Bali, which I
That's
don't
all right.
normally like or go to.
There's some okay parts of Bali.
Don't judge
I
me.
was recently in Bali. I used
Were
to live
you?
in Indonesia. I lived in Indonesia for
But
5
probably
years.
in a more interesting part of
in
Indonesia.
Jakarta,
Yeah,
which is
that's-
extremely interesting. Too interesting, I would actually argue.
Jakarta is too interesting.
It's, I mean, there's 30 something million people.
Yeah.
The greater, it's more than Australia.
Yeah.
The whole city area,
Yeah.
which is probably roughly the same area as Sydney, or
I've
probably
never
a little
spent
bit
proper
bigger.
time in Jakarta. I've been there
It's
just to sort
hardcore.
of get out of Jakarta.
Yeah,
which
the
tends to be-
pollution's insane. The number
Yeah.
of people's insane. There's no green space. I mean, there's so much going on. It's like if you want to feel alive and over.
Well, I do love a crazy Asian city. Like I'm much more on the Bangkok or Saigon side of things
Yeah,
than on the
I used to live in
Singapore,
Bangkok
on
as
the
well.
clinical kind of side of things. But-
Bangkok is a functional version of Jakarta.
yeah, Jakarta has always struck me as a place that has a lot of the downsides of a big Asian city without
And
a lot of the
very few
upsides.
upsides.
You know what I mean? Like
People are great.
all the chaos and smog.
People are lovely.
Yeah,
but,
right. Yeah.
But yeah, just if you grew up in Australia and you're used to having a little bit more space and footpaths that don't open up in front of you that you can fall down all the time.
No, I like all that. I do
Well,
like all that.
It is fun for a while, and then after a few years, you start going, I just like to be able to walk down the street without having to worry.
Yeah, I'm
whether or
sure.
not I'm gonna like fall in a hole.
No, but I like that.
Call
You know
me.
that smell when you get off the plane in Mumbai or
I know,
Saigon.
it's great. The air hugs you.
The air hugs you. It's a combination of sewage and durian and just sweat and air conditioning.
Yeah,
it's great.
And after I read that book, God, what was that book? Set in India. Shantaram. After I read that, I was like, I'm just gonna embrace and lean into Jakarta.
Yeah.
And go, oh, this is actually really exciting.
I asked the author of Shantaram to come on the show once, and he was busy doing something else. But it was like, it's one of those things where like every 25-year-old dude who reads Shantaram is like, I clearly have to go and live in India and get arrested and go and spend rot in an Indian jail for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
To find myself.
Well, maybe he did.
Yeah, Andrew Lowenthal is with us if you're just joining us on the live stream. There's lots going on in Australia, and I think this is a useful time to touch base about it, because in a global context where so much is happening abroad, and we could be talking about Iran or Trump or whatever, Australians are focused on things that are also relevant to everybody else, but just not pressing right now, like free speech, hate speech, jihadism, terrorism, cancellation, wokeness, literary festivals where people get, uninvited, gun law reform. Basically, in the wake of the Bondi terrorist attack, there's a lot of hubbub in Australia about should we, at a state or federal level, introduce more restrictions on guns. There seems to be a broad consensus that we should, except for on the conservative side of politics, the very conservative side of politics, I should say, because the mainstream Conservative Party is broadly in support of reforming gun laws to make them more strict. Then there's a parallel conversation about hate speech and free speech and what the contours of that should be. So the state government, and correct me if I'm wrong in briefing any of this, wants to introduce hate speech legislation that would outlaw intimidating slogans and vilification of racial and ethnic groups. Some people who are more pro-hate speech laws and more anti-free speech want to expand that to include groups like LGBTQIA plus people. The Muslim Council of Australia wants to make sure that religion is included as a category so that it's hate speech.
Why is that blasphemy law?
So that it's hate speech to criticize religions.
That is blasphemy law.
Yeah, that's a blasphemy law. Yeah, basically. And at the same time, we've also got this concurrent and supposedly unrelated, but thematically very much related brouhaha, where Australia's largest literary festival, the Adelaide Writers' Festival, has had to be cancelled after almost all of the invitees boycotted the festival and walked out just weeks before it began, because the festival uninvited a Palestinian Australian writer who had said things that were certainly anti-Zionist and probably edging up towards anti-Jewish, and certainly, participating in a narrative that a lot of people who are on the more pro-Israel or pro-Jewish side of things felt was insensitive, especially in the wake of the Bondi terrorist attacks. So there's a lot of poring over the tea leaves of that and saying, should she have been cancelled? How was she cancelled? Was she and the festival board hypocrites for claiming that they're free speech warriors at the same time as they had actually already participated in cancellations of themselves, of their own, at the very same festival? And into this fray steps the one and only Andrew Lowenthal, carrying the flag of freedom all the way. Like you've worked in Asia, you've worked in the United States. You have an online freedom network, which is called not Love, but Liebe Net, as in freedom.
Yeah, for the German speakers.
That's because you're a Nazi, obviously. So you've called it a German name in the eyes of many on the left. Situate us. What should I care about in what order?
Oh, I mean, that was such a list. Even I thought there was a lot going on. I think some of that is quite pressing. I would say. Although that was probably irony on your behalf. I mean, where?
No. I mean, I was serious in that it seems each one in isolation seems like a nothing burger in comparison to potential war with Iran, but they also touch on these very deep themes that we've all been wrestling with for the past decade.
Yeah, which is basically
free speech, hate speech, cancellation. What can you say? What can't you say? How should democracies tolerate extreme opinions and so on and so forth?
But also, as we were kind of saying, kind of in the hallway, I think it's actually a question about who we are, as what is an Australian, who is an Australian collectively, who are we, etc. And I think Australia is quite confused about that or grappling with that, because there's a lot of kind of new things happening, a lot of conversations that didn't used to have to happen, and a lot of an extreme inability to have uncomfortable conversations. Sorry,
and not just Australians, but I mean, not just Australians. People will be watching this in America, going, "Well, yeah, Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, what do you?"
And we're obviously nowhere near as far down the kind of path of insanity as many other places in the world are, and it would be good to not go down that path. But I feel like we have taken several steps in that direction, and I think the Adelaide Festival is actually a good example of the kind of having taken too many steps down that pathway, where we're essentially in this kind of proxy wars of cancellation, where people are doing it on all sides. So the person who was cancelled from the Adelaide Festival, as you mentioned, I don't think she should have been cancelled. I don't think what she says is very nice at all. Not that nicest is necessarily kind of the metric, but I mean, it's interesting that she would even fit within the Overton window, because she's I imagine there's a lot more moderate Palestinians and that could have been invited, and yet she was kind of put on the
I'm not sure platform. About that. Really? I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't think she was beyond the pale, in the sense that if you're going to pander to the anti-Zionist position, then it's very difficult to do so without it's very likely that the person is going to regard. Well, shall we just put some flesh on the bones of what it is that she said, so that we're not wrestling with a ghost here.
Yeah.
So for people who haven't followed this, this writer, this Palestinian Australian writer, Randa Abdel Fattah, on the day after the October 7th attacks, she apparently posted an image on Facebook of a parachutist with the Palestinian flag, which seemed insensitive. In 2024, she tweeted, "The goal is decolonization and the end of this murderous Zionist colony." So, yeah, end of this murderous Zionist colony is, whilst that is obviously extreme in the sense that it's calling for a nation to be annihilated, basically, it is also consistent with the broadly accepted Palestinian view of the world, which is that it's not this isn't just about the occupation of the West Bank and the blockade of Gaza. This is fundamentally about whether or not there should be a Jewish ethno-state in the region, or whether Palestinians should control that land. And in 2024, she also reshared those leaked details of 600 Australian Jews who were they were creatives and academics. They were not political activists or, political Zionists. In fact, I was added to this list for a period, and Subsequently, they were all doxxed as if they were, legitimate targets of hate just because they were Jewish. So she participated in that doxing. And then she and 9 other academics sent a letter to the Adelaide Festival board chair and to its director and to its CEO, asking them to rescind an invitation to Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist.
Mm-hmm.
Subsequently, he was disinvited, although they said that he couldn't attend due to a scheduling clash.
Yeah,
but
which he recently confirmed, I think, as well.
Well, no, he confirmed. They made it sound like there was a scheduling clash between his schedule and the festival. He just confirmed that he was invited and then received a follow-up email uninviting him due to a scheduling clash on their part. Sorry. And he said there was no scheduling clash on his part. And then the latest news this morning is that a fellow board member of the Adelaide Festival has broken ranks and said, no, actually, the board director, Louise Adler, did cancel Friedman. And
really?
That was he's broken the silence on the board thing and said that it wasn't a scheduling thing. And then Louise Adler's only response is to say, I can't believe that a board member would break the secrecy of the board, not to deny that it's actually that this is incredibly unprofessional of him. So when Adler, who I know a bit and who I like, and so I don't want to make it seem like I'm throwing her under the bus, but these are her words. She announced her resignation as director of the Adelaide Festival in The Guardian.
Announced. Sorry.
Right. She announced it, saying that she can't be party to the silencing of this Palestinian Australian writer. And she said, I can't be party to silencing writers. So with a heavy heart, I'm resigning from my role as the director. Writers and writing matters, even when they are presenting ideas that discomfort and challenge us. We need writers now more than ever as our media closes up, as our politicians grow daily more cowed by real power, as Australia grows more unjust and unequal. Which does seem hypocritical, because she believes in anti-Israel positions. She, agitated for and supported and enacted the cancellation of a prominent American voice in the form of Thomas Friedman. She participated in the elevation and the platforming of an extremely anti-Israel voice. And then when that person was then cancelled against her will, under supposed pressure from the governor of South Australia, the premier of South Australia, who's like the governor of an American state, and then people resigned in protest, she makes it a free speech thing, even at the same time as she's obviously participated in the same thing in the other direction. So I don't.
Well, no, and also interestingly, in that letter, she kind of makes reference to, I think, psychosocial well-being, that like kind of calls for these things, or kind of safety in these spaces is wrong. We shouldn't call for like these spaces to be safe,
right?
Which is exactly what progressives have been doing forever, in the last kind of 10 years, and saying, well, no, it's unsafe space. And actually, one of the other ones you could add to that list is that the same writer / activist signed a letter to cancel Deborah Conway, who's a prominent Australian pro-Israel singer.
Oh, I missed that bit. Is that
from the Perth festival, along with 500 other kind of progressives, essentially, including, I got in a kind of online spat with a friend, or I don't know what the status is anymore, because they essentially put up a post saying, oh, this is what's going on in Adelaide is so wrong, free speech, da 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 da, and etc. And then I looked at this letter, and I was like, oh, you're actually on that letter. Kind of thing as well. So this is
on a letter trying to cancel a prominent Jewish musician
from a festival.
And this is what is so tricky, specifically, I think, about the case of Palestine and Israel, is that identity gets very easily confused with politics, in the sense that, not that I want to sound like I'm totally in favor of the cancellation of the Palestinian activist and writer, but she was cancelled for things she said. She wasn't cancelled for her ethnicity. Cancelling Deborah Conway or doxing Australian Jewish creatives is cancelling them because of their ethnicity, not because of things that they've said. Now,
the letter cited things that she said that
I
know they were ridiculous, because it was saying that was creating an unsafe space, and
it's highly likely that a Jewish person is going to have a that a lay left-wing Jewish person is going to have a more conflicted and nuanced attitude towards the war in Gaza than either a full-throated defender of Palestinians will, or a person who's just, a lay person who all they do is see images of murdered babies, and that's the only conclusion that they can come to about what's going on over there. So needless to say, a Jewish Australian is likely to try to inject some kind of qualifications into it, which can be misconstrued as being a defense of like Zionist barbarism.
I think that was actually there was some qualifications around children and something, and then, but I mean, I think the main point to zoom out is people are kind of trying to cancel each other across the board. I mean, some would say it's more this or it's more that, and this is like, I think what the Adelaide Festival is essentially like the kind of peak insanity of this kind of like constant process of I'm going to cancel you, I'm going to cancel you, etc., rather than if you don't like the speaker, don't turn up to the session. If you don't like the festival platforming the speaker, don't go to the festival. If you really don't like the festival, write a letter, like do a podcast, like do something. But like,
aren't they basically operating in that system? I mean, the people who resigned from the festival would say that that is what they're doing, that they're like, it's tricky to know when your participation is an endorsement and when it's merely participation.
But I mean, I think that's the problem. It's just like, okay, just because am I here now endorsing every single statement Josh Steps has ever
certainly
made?
Hope so.
Then like no one thinks that.
Yeah.
Right? Well, no, obviously, actually, clearly, some people do,
and some people do think that because I have you on the show, I'm endorsing everything that you say. I mean, people will say like, "Oh, well, you can't trust Josh." What Josh Zepp says, he talks to Candace Owens.
He talked to Tony Abbott.
Even worse.
Insane.
I mean, so there is this perception that if you like platform people, I mean,
but I think that's one of the things we absolutely have to get rid of, and I think pointing out the hypocrisy of the kind of cross cancellation is one of the ways to do that and go, okay, everyone needs to stop doing this because it's just a kind of death spiral for the kind of conversations we have, and essentially eats away at our democratic fabric. Eventually,
but then what happens when, like, because there's a curation process in the appointment of these people in the first place, it's not like these, like, I wrestle a bit with this in the sense that I don't believe that people should be hounded out of their jobs, or that we should work behind the scenes to try to coerce publishers or studios or networks or whatever into firing people, excommunicating them. We shouldn't be pressuring agents and managers from, or publicists from not working with people because their ideas are beyond the pale, so that they're functionally excluded from society. But when it comes to the case of, here is a literary festival that has made a conscious choice to elevate the views of this person who is speaking on behalf of what many people would regard as being a deluded or deranged or hate-adjacent worldview. I'm speaking theoretically here. I don't know enough about this activist's work to know if that's true, but that's the perspective of the people who wanted her cancelled. Then it's almost like the quote-unquote cancellation is really just an expression of pulling back from an overly sympathetic stance towards a particular worldview, rather than, like, nobody's, I don't think, or nobody that I would support is trying to get her to render her incapable of publishing future books or articles or going on podcasts. Or
well, you could argue that her being removed from the festival essentially does, and I think this might be one of the arguments she's making, kind of taints her reputation, reputational damage that then does impinge upon her ability to make. Probably means she sells. Well, actually, now she's probably selling more.
Sells more.
Now she's totally selling more books, and now etc. So it's probably that argument it might be a bit hard to make. But you could also see another situation where for someone actually them being removed from a festival or something does do kind of sustained reputational damage and does limit their ability to then go out and make money. I mean, I think it was in kind of hindsight. Well, I think in foresight, you could have seen that this was a bad idea as far as I'm concerned. In terms of, I don't think she should have been. You invite someone, you live with it.
Okay? That's generally my attitude as well. Like just make the decision carefully.
And then if that now makes your festival look silly, then so be it. Then you live with your decision, and then ask them difficult questions and say, why did you post this on October 8 in the context of post Bondi? Like, how do you situate your kind of past statements and activism?
Well, I also don't know what the
just
context
kind
of
of have
her
a
appearance was, though. Like, it may have just been her having a platform to read a passage from her book. Like,
but then so change it up and
Yeah,
go, we
that's
don't
true.
think this is enough, actually, given the new
yeah,
context.
that's right.
So we want to we're going to invite you to have a conversation with Josh Steps.
Absolutely.
Or
Invite
something.
me or another prominent Jewish Australian who's not a deranged,
And no one would have-
Netanyahu person
no one
to
would have-
engage with her.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
No one would have complained about that.
Yeah.
And I think that would have been the right response, because clearly what was done was the wrong response. And now you've collapsed this whole festival, which, and I think made the whole situation far, far worse. And so there's some much bigger problem here in terms of like who's running these festivals, who's putting pressure. The people at the festivals don't seem to be able to resist sustained pressure, because it's not just this one. There's other ones, and you can point to other festivals around
There was the Bendigo Riders Festival. There was the Sydney Riders
as well,
Festival.
where there's the people running the festival aren't really in charge of the festival. The mob is in charge of the festival,
Right.
And everyone's kind of preemptively thinking about what the mob or various different mobs might do and how they need to kind of program and curate as a result.
Yeah.
And I think that you're a director. I mean, you're just a director of a festival. I mean, it's kind of important, but it's also kind of not that important. It's like, I mean, I think where it becomes more difficult is the public money question, because if these were all kind of independent festivals, then you could go, well, you start your own festival, et cetera. But here you are taking money from the public purse, and so there is a little bit of a zero sumness in that sense about it, because someone else is not getting that public money. Still, it's like, I think you appoint someone for the duration and a period for 3 years or 5 years to run a festival, and then they get to run it the way they get to run it. And if people don't like it, people don't like it. I think there's just too much meddling.
I mean,
which doesn't mean I agree. I would probably disagree with like 90% of what gets programmed at cultural festivals in Australia. And I think sometimes the Overton window they're drawing is either too narrow or too wide. But like, that's life. Like, you don't get to live inside your own Overton window. Like, you have to interact with other people's Overton windows and deal with it. Which isn't to say, like, obviously some people say, well, her comments were so aggressive that they made me like not just uncomfortable, but like, fear for my safety.
But that's bullshit. I mean, that's obviously bullshit.
But that would be the argument, though.
Bullshit. Like the amount, the conversation around safety is like, as we all know, so grossly inflated. I mean, I have so many, Gen Z friends and colleagues who just talk about safety as if it's just another synonym for comfort. So like, I don't want to go out wearing, like, I have laziness. I have gay friends who'll be like, I don't want to go out wearing this because I'm frequently made to feel unsafe. And when I actually,
what are they wearing?
It might be something flamboyant, right? But when I actually dig into it,
that was victim blaming, right?
Well, what they mean is that someone will like raise an eyebrow or make a remark if they walk into a 7-Eleven and buy a pack of cigarettes while they're wearing a dress,
tube,
right. or whatever.
Yeah,
that's not. I mean, that could, in some circumstances, be an implied threat, but 90% of the time or more, that's going to be just someone finding it peculiar because it is peculiar in the context and remarking upon it.
I didn't know gay people smoked. So,
exactly, that's right. They raised an eyebrow, being like, "Really, Gen Z can afford $50 for a pack of cigarettes?" But the public money thing is interesting because not only does it introduce the phenomenon that you mentioned, which is that public money is scarce, so any money that's going towards X voice is not going towards Y voice, but it also means that there's another entity in the room exerting influence, which is in this case, the state. Yeah, and so it seems that in this case, the premier of the state, i.e. the governor, had actually put in a call to, I can't remember who on the board, or the director or so, or the chair or something, saying, I'm getting a lot of people who are contacting me who are concerned about this particular speaker. I'm definitely not saying that your funding will be withdrawn, he said. And this is not an instruction because we're all at arm's length and
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
not
You're
a politicized
independent.
festival. You are absolutely independent. I just wanted to relay to you what I'm hearing. And of course,
Although actually he was more explicit, like in the media, where he didn't kind of say not in terms of the pressure he put on, but he just said, yes, she should have been cancelled.
Yeah.
So he did heartily endorse
the
cancellation. I think that is the dangerous space to be in as well, where senior government officials are basically directly pressuring festivals about who they can and cannot.
Yes, I mean, especially in the wake of snafus like at the ABC, where the former ABC chair, Ita Buttrose, would insert herself into editorial decisions about who and who shouldn't be on the air.
Someone who was hired for a week and had 2 or 3 days to go on the air
contract for 3 days, and then became a national hero because of that.
I think this is also the people who are in charge there's some competency problems in that there are these new kind of social phenomena that they don't know how to manage and handle. Like they're in this kind of networked internet digital environment, and they don't know how to deal when like this stuff pops up, and they know how to deal with it when it was the 80s. And then I'm not going to be kind of doing an anti-boomer rave here, but maybe it's going to slightly sound like that.
For some of them, they came of age in the 50s, depending on who we're talking about.
But I mean, it's like people are ill-equipped, I think, to deal with this new environment. The leadership of these kind of festivals and spaces and institutions don't know how to deal with them, because you kind of get, having run a kind of medium-sized NGO, you kind of get a little bit kind of not trapped, but you kind of sometimes feel like you're being puppeteered by the staff, and you're not really actually in charge, because the staff have a lot more power now, which is good in many respects, but they also have this power of like insane reputational damage, because you can just get on the internet and just start saying things about you and say, oh, this person's bad because of X, Y, and Z, and you can't really do very much about it. You can go through defamation proceedings, etc. But you have this kind of children of the corn type situation where the people in charge are not really in charge, and so there's kind of in some ways a whole new authority model that needs to be developed.
Well, they've come to believe that they're not in charge.
They also exactly,
like the mob. They've just been way too cowed.
They have, and they're too cowardly. They've been way too cowed, and they don't exert authority, which in some ways is interesting. Maybe this is a kind of switch to the Trump administration, which is they've just kind of gone, well, we just don't care, right? Because in some ways, the power of the kind of woke was to get senior people in leadership to care about what the repercussions might be for them. And as soon as you start going, well, I don't care, I'm not biting my tongue anymore, they lose all their power. I don't care about the consequences, etc. And then that's this kind of, I think, has resulted, part of the backlash to that has resulted in this overly kind of muscular kind of, well, I really don't care, and I'm just like going to do whatever the hell I want, and then that also just kind of fuels the whole cycle.
Well, that's right. And whether they actually don't care about the mob, or whether they just care more about the mob that claims to be pushing back against the people who are too censorious on the left, is another question. Like, it's not like Trump and JD Vance and Stephen Miller are operating in an ecosystem that is detached from Megyn Kelly, Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes. So they've also got their cheerleaders and their mob.
But I guess also all those people operate in an environment where they're economically secure, whereas some in that, even if the mob comes for them, like Ben Shapiro's people can donate more money to, or he's going to be able to raise more capital for investments. Whereas if you're inside a kind of left-wing space, essentially your economic security is put at great risk, because you're going to get removed from the economy essentially that you are part of, and so you have to. But I mean, if
you're Antoinette Lattouf, or you're this writer, or you are cancelled for a reason.
I mean more like a Louise Adler kind of thing. So if someone comes, like the festival director kind of thing, who's in that economy, who's like a senior person running a kind of progressive style institution, they're much more at the mercy of the kind of woke mob than like a kind of Megyn Kelly is, because like it's not, Megyn Kelly's not going to lose money or her position if a whole bunch of woke people come for her.
No, you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. The analog would be that there is a right-wing mob that fuels support for the Trump side of things. And that characterizes itself as being a reactionary backlash to the left-wing mob.
Okay.
But I'm just disputing your characterization that the left has a mob and then the right is just saying, we're not going to do mob politics because we don't give a fuck. I'm just sort of saying there's actually also a mob on the right that
totally
defines itself in its opposition.
I'm just saying
that
because they're outside of the kind of progressive economy.
But they're not outside of their own mob economy.
Oh, no, they're not. They have their own mob economy as well. And they can also have audience capture, et cetera, et cetera. But they're outside. They don't have to worry about getting cancelled.
No. In a way. Well,
because the cancellations are mostly intramural.
That's right. But they could get cancelled by their own people if they stray too far. You know,
cancellation, I think, is mostly an intramural phenomenon.
Yes, definitely. Obviously. I mean, almost by definition, because you have to have purchase within the clan in order to be able to exclude someone from the clan. Right. If they're outside of the clan already, you've got nothing to cancel them from. I mean, the mob dynamics is really interesting that you say that, because each side believes that they're not a mob, but that the other side is. Right. So if you talk 100%. if you talk to one of the progressive types about what went on with the doxing of the Jewish creatives or the cancellation of Deborah Conway, the Jewish musician.
Well, she wasn't cancelled, but the attempt.
Yeah. The mob that they will talk about is the nefarious network of fairly powerful Jewish Australians or Jewish people anywhere who use their connections to people in finance and the media and politics to influence things. So it's the WhatsApp group of I think it was Lawyers for Israel or something like that, who were an extremely pro-Zionist group of lawyers who were agitating for the cancellation of people who were, too pro-Palestinian or something after October 7th. That's where they regard as being the locus of sinister mob power to be. On the other side, people who are more skeptical about the pro-Palestinian or woke or left progressive mob will view the actual mob with power as being this loose network of social media motivated people whose sympathies are always deranged by algorithms and by their own cluelessness about complicated issues like the Middle East, and who go on marches across the Harbour Bridge with people holding signs that say globalize the Intifada, even if they don't really know what they're talking about and couldn't tell you what happened in 1967. And so the people who are marching across the Harbour Bridge think that people in positions of power are too easily cowed by sinister, powerful forces who are pulling strings behind the scenes. And the people who object to the people who are marching across the Harbour Bridge in favor of Gaza think that people in positions of power are too easily cowed by outrages on Twitter and people writing earnest columns in The Guardian. And both sides are right.
Liberal, people we don't use the language liberal elites here in Australia.
Are too cowed by either. They're too cowed. They're too afraid of mobs on Twitter, and they're too afraid of angry letters from powerful individuals who are, trying to get somebody fired.
But they're essentially operating in the same dynamic space, which is not to have a conversation, but essentially to exert other forms of power to remove people's voices, to silence them. And yes, and I agree, both is probably more than one, but across the spectrum, most people don't seem to think that when they use the same tactics, they're doing anything wrong. Whereas I think the whole problem is the tactic, full stop, because everyone's essentially, not everyone, many people are contributing to essentially degradation of the ability for us to have a kind of sophisticated discourse about our society and where it is headed. And essentially that crumbles slowly into a kind of much less effective democracy. So I actually think it's actually existential, because you don't kind of see it. You don't see it crumbling in real time, or maybe there are moments where you kind of see it crumbling in real time, like last week or this week, but it's just kind of ebbing. It does feel like it's ebbing away in a way. And if we don't find a new way to kind of do things, then we're just going to get trapped in this spiral. And so what's the circuit breaker? Because it doesn't seem like Adelaide is going to be the circuit breaker. The backlash to the hate speech laws is interesting as a potential circuit breaker, because I was thinking the coalition and quite possibly the Greens were just going to go ahead with it, and now both both of them have basically pulled out and said we're not. I mean, for different reasons, as you say. In some ways, the Greens did raise concerns about human rights and protest laws, but they also were saying, well, you need to add like another 100 groups to these hate speech laws because you've only it's too narrow. It's not broad.
They're like, we
enough.
want to be able to engage in the hate speech that we want to engage in, namely hate speech against Jews, or certainly coded hate speech against Jews, but really overt hate speech against Israel. And at the same time, we want to include a whole bunch more protections for the people who we favor.
But it's all that you can't, and you can't do that, and you can't. None of this works. Essentially, this model of trying to kind of finagle every single little bit of micromanaging like speech is it's impossible. And the kind of proposals there are just going to end up essentially. We've been kind of quite fortunate of not going down the kind of UK, well, not as far down the kind of UK line of all these kind of police door knocks and people getting arrested for tweets and like that. Largely, to my understanding, hasn't happened in Australia, but essentially these laws.
Can you just explain what you're talking about in the UK for people who aren't across it?
I mean, my understanding is that the statistic is that there are 12,000 arrests or visits per year in the UK from police for often what are called non-crime hate incidents. I think they've started to pull back a little bit on those because they just got so
And a
extreme.
non-crime hate incident could be your grandmother writing on Facebook, there are too many migrants in this country, or Muslims should go back to where they came from.
I don't recognize my street.
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, sometimes they're more serious than that as well.
But if they're really more serious, then they can reach the threshold of a crime.
Well, yeah, exactly. They don't reach the threshold.
They don't reach the threshold of crime. Vilification or intimidation or incitement.
Yeah,
then it would be in a different category.
Yeah,
presumably. So it is bonkers. And I mean, the fact that you get stories like Graham Linehan, the comedy writer who became a fairly, I would say, unseemly and deranged anti-trans person. I think he got too obsessed by that particular issue in ways that were unconstructive. Nonetheless, he wasn't calling for trans people to be beaten or rounded up and or
there was something about punching in the face at some point that was
I think he was making a joke.
It was a joke, but it was a joke, and it didn't
super masculine and who was like 6 foot tall.
And it didn't require however many police to like turn up at Heathrow
long story short, he got off a plane
him
from the States, and there were a half dozen or whatever police officers there to arrest him for having done nothing, but for just having talked in ways that were mean,
and no
and
actual
online,
not a serious threat to anyone in a physical sense.
So yes, we don't quite.
We haven't gone down that road yet, but this would totally send us down that road. These new hate speech laws, because you don't.
In the current incarnation, would they? And this is what I wanted to maybe argue with you.
I'm
getting to the point where I'm less on your total free speech absolutist.
Oh no, I wouldn't say I'm total free speech.
What would your position be
in terms of
dealing with the initial proposal post Bondi terrorist attack was to make it a crime to it's already a crime to incite violence against people on the basis of their race or ethnicity, but it would make it would make hate speech against only the categories of race or ethnicity a crime. Now, I'm very leery. In fact, more than leery. I'm super opposed to any kind of legislation that would criminalize people's opinions about beliefs. Beliefs. So I don't want any hate speech legislation to cover religion, because religion is a set of beliefs. You have to be able to criticize people's worldviews. That would be like outlawing criticism of Marxism or capitalism. Like, you have to be able to criticize Shintoism or Christianity or whatever. These are a set of ideas. But I do not have a huge problem anymore, given how crazy and deranged and hate-filled the world is becoming, with medium-sized cultures like Australia just going, you're just not gonna be saying that people are vermin because of their race or ethnicity. But this thing, I think, just things that they don't have any control over, that are obvious, that they're wearing on their
but there's largely already laws for all of that. We've got so many hate speech laws at the state level and at the federal level, and we've had all these hate speech laws in, and they weren't and in some ways they've been used, but in some ways they've been used in ridiculous ways, like the person who spotted a Nazi tattoo on someone's calf at the beach kind of thing, and then kind of essentially went and reported
Did
them
that
to the
happen?
police.
Did
Yeah,
it?
in Newcastle.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like, do we want to go down that pathway? In some ways,
But what happened to the guy with the Nazi?
He got arrested. I don't know what the next stage of the process is, but essentially,
because you're no longer allowed to
you can't. That's a hate.
Display
it's a hate symbol.
Nazi insignia.
But also for me, I'm like, okay, cool. So thank you for telling me you're a Nazi.
Yeah.
Now I know you're a Nazi.
That's true.
So I'm actually not for outlawing that and Hezbollah flag, and that's like, okay, cool. You're affiliated with Hezbollah. Now I know. Like now it's clear. And then
I think, but hang on, there's a distinction between intimidation and display, right? I mean,
I don't think it's intimidation to display a Hezbollah flag at a Palestinian march.
No, that's right. But if you're occupying the downtown of a city every single weekend with mass rallies that are chanting very enthusiastically a bunch of things that to a certain community will feel like intimidation. I mean, you had week after week after week
feel
after
like
week.
Intimidation. I think that's the problem. It feels like intimidation to that group. And so we can't legislate on
you could do a scientific test, and you could send a bunch of people wearing Jewish skull caps, yarmulkes, walking past these rallies, and if nothing happened to them and they weren't spat on and shoved or punched, then I suppose you could say that it's not intimidation and they were all making it up in their heads. But the reality was that week after week after week in 2024, our cities, portions of our cities were rendered out of bounds for overtly Jewish people because of those rallies. So that, like, that's different from someone who simply spots a flag. Like if you're a Muslim, if I go up to outside a mosque and I drag a dead pig and I start waving it around,
that's very illegal.
Or some other gesture of obvious intimidation, or like, I don't know, what would they hate?
Animal cruelty grounds. You're already in jail.
Even just in Israel, even if I was suicidal enough to wave a Star of David at them, that would be different from if I was.
But that's
simply if I just had a Star of David tattooed on my calf, right?
Yeah,
so I think the laws should cover intentional. If they are going to exist, they should cover like intentional.
But in the new ones, you don't even have to prove that someone was harmed. And so actually no one can be harmed, and as I understand in the new laws, just a reasonable person could think that someone could be harmed,
right?
And then you get 5 years in jail, as I understand it, kind of thing. So it's really taking it to extreme. And also, we had all these hate speech laws pre-Bondi, and did they stop Bondi?
Well, we didn't have all of them because they're talking about introducing them now.
Well, we have even more, but we had a lot, and I don't think Bondi was caused by hate speech.
No.
That's the thing. So this is the wrong response.
This is the other reason why I feel some sympathy for the writer who was cancelled in the Adelaide Festival, because although, just to loop that back in, although you were saying, look, it probably enhances her profile actually to have been going through all of this. I would also say that I am empathetic to her because she's now being connected to a terrorist attack when there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever. Totally. In fact, 100%. She has said that she doesn't support, violence for any reason. So she's obviously, and I do think it's really unfair and it's really delicate balance, right? Because I wrote a column for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age a few weeks ago, which some people interpreted as making this link between pro-Palestine, pro-Gaza protests and the Bondi attack. I was very careful to say that I don't think that there's a link. What I was saying was we have not been at our best in turning the volume up on cool-headed reason and turning the volume down on sloganeering. And I think that a climate which encourages knee-jerk groupthink is a climate that is more conducive to people acting, to nudging crazy people who are religious fanatics over the edge, which does not mean that I think that someone like her or someone who innocently just has a strident opinion against Israel is necessarily a cause of terrorism. But there's enough of a There's enough of a connection in the degradation of the conversation to make it problematic.
I mean, I think the issue there is that, so if you look at, say, the March for Australia, so these is kind of anti-immigration rallies.
These are sort of right-wing white.
Yeah. Well, actually, sometimes at least some of the videos I've seen, there will be kind of like newer migrants who are like
nationalists.
They don't know. Well, so there were like National Socialist Network, actual neo-Nazis who turned up. And my understanding, there's quite a lot of like internal policing, which is like, get out. We don't want you here, because obviously it made it look made all the people marching look really, really, really bad. I don't think that the same thing happened in the kind of pro-Palestine movement, where it's like, oh wait, actually you're really far out there group, like you're not welcome to like turn up at our space anymore. You're actually going to make us look really, really bad. Actually, it was kind of papered over, and it was there was no kind of internal discipline mechanism, which actually the progressives are normally good at internal discipline these days.
When they want to be. So basically
to say, no, you're not part of our movement. You're just way, way too far out there. So, I mean, I think part of the problem is that Australia tends to go for like technocratic solutions to everything. And I don't think the problem is a kind of problem of technocracy. Do we need more laws? We need to micromanage this? We need to micromanage that. We have all this safety stuff as well that we could talk about. Teen social media ban, like everything is a kind of like technocratic legal problem to be solved, rather than actually a political problem, or problem that would actually be in some ways a harder conversation to have. And I also think part of the issue, as you were kind of saying with Bondi, is that I see that essentially as a kind of security and intelligence failure. I mean, these guys were like, one of them was already had been on an ASIO, our kind of FBI or CIA kind of intelligence agency watch list. They'd gone to the southern Philippines, like literally a well-known kind of like extremist hotspot, had not been questioned on the way back in. Apparently, they'd even written that they went to Mindanao.
Is that right? I was
at least in their arrival
that.
cast to the Philippines. I definitely know that they did, and some of them said they had on the way back, but I cannot confirm. But it's like, you would think that, you might get stopped and asked a couple of questions coming back into the country. Oh, where have you been? Oh, southern Philippines. Oh, interesting. Tell us about.
Or even if you're not stopped there, that your name would get sent up the chain.
So many red flags, and nothing comes up. And so this is why it's like, for me, part of this is also all a diversion from essentially failures of the government to say, well, it wasn't us, it wasn't we, the government and the security intelligence services, that failed. It was all the hate speech. It was all the kind of bad people on the streets. It was all of this, that, and the other. And so it's this kind of dragnet approach to kind of trying to like deal with the problem, whereas actually you just need a kind of like, you just should be spearfishing, not kind of like drift net fishing across the whole of society.
I would disagree a bit, but mainly on the question of hate speech as it relates to religious fanaticism. I think you're right that the government wants to distract blame from its intelligence failures. I think the easiest way that it's doing that is by going to its safest and most popular territory, which is guns. It's funny that after every atrocity, each country will go to the easiest thing that builds the greatest consensus. So in Australia, that's gun restrictions. In America, where gun restrictions are incredibly unpopular, it's mental health or whatever. Right? After a mass shooting, nobody talks about guns except for the people who are already super enthusiastic about restricting guns. It's always like, well, let's talk about the underlying issues of, the problems with young men, or like mental health or something like that. Here, the easier terrain for them to retreat to is, let's talk about making it harder to get guns. But I think that the problem is that they already did that once, and so it becomes a little bit harder to sell. Yeah, although it's atrophied quite a lot. So my understanding
there is a little bit. I mean, not being able to get a gun as a non-citizen, I was actually quite shocked that you can be a non-citizen and own multiple firearms.
And own multiple firearms. That's right. And also, be that close to someone who has been on a
intelligence watch list.
No, but I mean, part of the problem is that the gun law restrictions were brought in almost 30 years ago, and the technology of guns has been moving so rapidly that there's this constant game of whack-a-mole where the authorities are supposed to classify them into these.
But I'm also of the thing of like, okay, so next time they'll get a car and they'll drive it down, then they'll grab knives and they'll grab that. Like, if someone really wants to do something horrible, they will find
Yeah,
a
but I mean,
tool
that's always the
to do
bullshit
it.
talking point of the NRA. I mean, it's like,
Well,
yeah, they will, and it'll also happen. It also just happen less frequently. And I mean, you only have to look at places that
yeah,
are
I'm not
awash
like
with
for
guns
zero.
and
Like,
places that
I
aren't
don't think
awash with
children should
guns.
be given guns for their 5th birthday or anything like
No,
anything like
but
that.
I just mean that is always the argument, but it's just not borne out. There are 190 countries in the world, and there's a very close correlation between
Yeah.
once you hold for all of the other factors. You know, people can always point to like
Yeah,
Switzerland or
but I
something.
would
which is
largely say the
an
problem
outside.
with this incident was not kind of, well, there was some problem with their access to guns, but it wasn't kind of like the main thing. And I think what you're saying is right, is that the government essentially is deflecting kind of responsibility, and they kind of go, well, what can we need to be seen to be doing something, because you're not allowed to be seen to, you can't just say, don't just do something, stand there kind of thing, which in some ways I don't think they need very many new laws, and they certainly don't need to.
No, but
they certainly don't need to produce hundreds of pages of them and then give people 2 days to comment on them.
Yes, there was way too short a review period. But just to finish the thought that I was just adding to with your comment about there being, so we've got the guns question, we've got the hate speech question. In other words, what can you say in public, and like, are you allowed to denigrate groups? But then the third thing that I think is really the third rail that's hard for Australians in particular to talk about is religious fanaticism.
Right.
And
I thought you were going to say migration.
Yeah, well,
also a third rail.
Well, that's wrapped. Yeah, that's tied up. It's tied up in that as well. Yeah. So, like, the point that I was trying to make in my newspaper article a week after the attack was that it used to be the case that the small L liberal left could cohere around a set of universal principles which they regarded as being absolute. The rights of women, the rights of gays, the rights of pluralism, the rights of the insistence upon debate, the insistence upon being robust enough to be able to defend your own arguments, all of us having sort of thick skin, but also a sense of generosity towards each other's ideas, civil liberties, like, and the obsession, the drift over the past decade or two from that Martin Luther King, Gandhi, sort of Nelson Mandela, almost really Obama was the last public
universalism
figure of who to articulate this sort of universalist view of freedom, to a much more persnickety, identitarian, touchy, not treading on eggshells, not triggering any tripwires, avoiding the mob.
Universalism was considered kind of white supremacy.
Yeah, either passe and naive, or an excuse for white supremacy and fascism.
Yeah,
and
which meant that you then allowed people who had actually abhorrent views that were completely antagonistic to your previously held values, or even your currently held values of, gay rights, women's rights,
yes, that's right.
You essentially decide to tolerate them because that seems like a less worse option than tolerating the kind of white supremacist universalism.
Well, there's that, and there's also that you don't really have a leg to stand on in articulating that universalism, because you're so easily cowed by accusations of bigotry towards a group that you think is illiberal. So if there are imams, and there are, in mosques in Australia who persistently spew out a highly regressive Salafist, Wahhabi, anti-American, anti-Western, anti-Australian, Jew-hating, sexist, homophobic worldview week after week, and reliably turn their congregations more conservative and regressive, it's difficult to talk about that without your asshole puckering up a little bit and you're feeling like you're going to not be invited to the next party because it sounds like you're an Islamophobic bigot. You're not. I'm not saying that most Muslims believe this. I'm not denigrating Muslims in any way.
But under the new hate speech laws, you might have just done that.
Well, if you included religion, I could have. This is why I think it's important to talk about ideas. I'm criticizing ideas. I'm criticizing ideas that are being propagated that make certain claims.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely not denigrating anybody because of their ethnicity.
But I think this is why, in some ways, the progressive space at the moment has a problem in kind of meeting the moment, so to speak, is that it kind of is confused. It kind of doesn't know what pathway to choose, where because it wants to kind of it makes these kind of universalist claims around women and gay rights, etc., and then it also makes these claims for like kind of tolerance and openness and diversity, but that also means tolerating people who are anti the very same things that you believe, but selectively tolerating people who are anti the things you believe, because these people, it's okay if they're kind of, you know, anti-women's rights and anti-gay. These people over here, so, you know, if it's some, you know, one nation or whoever it might be, the kind of populist right party, well, no, you're totally not allowed to have those opinions. And
so
it's deeply confused.
Brown-skinned migrants from traditionally disenfranchised communities can be wildly sexist and homophobic and anti-Jewish, and those same beliefs transposed into a white right-wing farmer are beyond the pale. That is an obvious inconsistency.
That's totally, and I think that's where we've essentially ended up. And in some ways, I think that's very bad for progressives, because people start, I mean, I think it's one of the reasons you have the drift to the right for a lot of people, particularly young men. But I also think there's also real reasons why that has emerged. If you think of like the Iraq War, like, you know, most Australians saw that as like a largely unjust war, based on a complete bunch of fictions, etc., etc. They saw like the Muslims were really poorly treated during the war on terror, which I think is like absolutely true. And so that sympathy, rightful sympathy or empathy, has resulted how that's come out at the end, though, is in a kind of deep set of kind of confusion around like principles and how to essentially manage that reaction. Because I think a lot of that leadership in the past does need to be deeply critiqued, or we do need to kind of have a conversation with ourselves of like, well, what did we do kind of in the Middle East, or what? But we've ended up in this space where we can't have a consistent, well, I was going to say consistent conversation like around principles. We can't seem to have a conversation full stop.
I mean, yeah, and I should also make it clear that at the risk of being misunderstood as being, you know, specifically singling out one community or other, there's also a phenomenon of Jewish Australians feeling overly having this knee-jerk instinct about having to always defend everything that Israel does, for example. And there are all, I mean, every community has its version of the kind of irrational tribal defense of its worst elements. And I guess what I would hope for, and why I think it's important that Australian Muslims and Australian Jews regard their fealty towards this nation and towards liberalism as trumping their fealty to their clan, is that we can all get on the same side. I mean, the number of supportive text messages and emails that I got after Bondi checking in with me from my Muslim friends was really gratifying, and was actually much more pronounced than the number of caring messages I got from my white secular lefty pro-Palestinian friends. So I do think that you know, I like living in a multicultural country. I like living in a country that has lots of Asians, lots of Muslims, lots of Jews, lots of like everybody in it. I just think it's super important that we can call out religious fanaticism and bad ideas for being bad ideas without circling the wagons, and because they're bad ideas that are shared by
but even the fact that you have to hedge a little bit around that, what should be a pretty obvious thing to be crystal
clear about it.
I know, but
so
like,
easy
but
to
that's
be misunderstood.
But that's part of the problem, I think, is we're in that environment. We have to be like a little bit too careful.
Yeah, but I mean, let's start somewhere, right? Because most people are so careful they won't even say it. I mean, they'll think it, but they won't even risk.
So 100%.
Saying it.
But it's also it's these kind of different ideas are not distributed equally across society. Like they do occur more in some places than others. That would also be a super controversial thing to say. It's not like homophobia is equally distributed across every single section of Australian society. It peaks more over here and it troughs over there, etc., etc. And if you wanted to combat it, then you would go, you know, you'd find where the peaks are and you go, well, let's go and have a conversation over here. But also, you know, Chris Minns, the
leader of our state, of the most populous state.
I mean, he kind of said this thing, which, is it true? He basically said multicultural societies can't have free speech. I mean, that was essentially his statement.
I
We
didn't.
need.
I didn't hear
I've
that.
never heard him make this statement. I think
No.
he's made it more than once. Where essentially, in order to preserve kind of social harmony, this is why we don't have the same free speech laws as the United States. It's literally almost what he said.
Wow.
That you have to essentially make a choice. He's saying we're making a choice between free speech and social harmony.
Right.
And we're choosing
right.
social harmony because we live in a kind of multicultural society, and therefore that's the choice. I mean, this is what is said. And then the question is,
Jono, can you look up what that is? I don't want to be Googling while I'm talking to him.
So one of the question would be like, is that true? Does having a multi-ethnic society mean you can't have free speech? But also, if it is true, well, then Australians need to be able to have a debate in that question. It's like, okay, so the more multi-ethnic we become, the less freedoms we're gonna have. Is that what you're essentially telling us? I don't think that's true, but I also think that it's also true that the more diverse you become, the more the weaker your cultural norms are as well, because they're less shared.
I mean,
over time, like there's a kind of carrying capacity of how much kind of, this is where I'm going to get in massive trouble, how much kind of novelty you can introduce without kind of the base of the kind of commonality essentially be kind of going off in a different direction. And you have to think, be really careful about that. And I think we've just assumed you can like add all this stuff in, no problem, everything's good. But actually I think you have to be much more, multiculturalism is a fragile and precious thing, and you have to kind of carry it very carefully and manage it very carefully to make sure that you do get the best of all of the things that it brings without kind of creating fragmentation.
Yes,
essentially. But we're at the kind of dangerous space where we're at the kind of possible fragmentation level, but we're nowhere near where the kind of US and the UK is, and we're lucky because we can look at where the US and UK are and kind of go, okay, well, let's not go down that pathway. How do we get the best of all worlds?
I mean, I would say that the US and the UK are instructive differences in that respect, because I completely agree that the more different worldviews and ideologies and preconceptions and biases that you start pouring into a culture, of course, you're going to change that culture. I mean, as a recent guest on this show,
in good ways and in bad ways.
Absolutely,
that's the thing. And I think we've had this kind of kumbaya idea of like, it's all just going to be, I'm going to go to the street festival and then I can get my Thai food and I can go across the other one. There's my Sri Lankan food. And isn't this great? How many different like options I have? It's like, it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, a recent guest on this show, when we were talking about gay rights specifically and the support for gay rights in Europe waning, was saying, I mean, if 1 million people from Alabama moved to Norway, Norway would have a very different attitude.
Sounds like an awesome TV show.
Norway would have a different attitude towards guns.
Yeah.
And so it's not racist to say that if large numbers of highly conservative people from the Arab world move into, Germany, it's going to have a different attitude towards homosexuality than it did previously. What I think the solution is then is neither to throw your arms up in the air and say that, multiculturalism is a failed experiment and we have to close the doors, nor to say, well, we can't have free speech then because we all have to just pretend to love each other. But my argument in my column was to say that just means that you have to have an equivalent re-emphasis of your commitment to what the common values are.
Yeah.
And
but you also have to re-agree on what those common values are.
I'm not sure you have to re-agree. I think we got them.
Well, no, I agree.
Do you want to just WhatsApp me, Jono, the whatever the min's?
I do agree we've got them, but I think that there's now a substantial segment of the population saying, actually, no, we don't.
No, I know, but
we don't believe in
they're
that.
wrong.
Oh, there's. I agree. I 100% agree. But then no one's. I think there's very few people who are kind of willing to kind of say that, because
but that's our job, is to give them the backbone and to create the space and to create the precedents to do what we
because also for the vast majority of people, that's why they've turned up as well. Right. That's why they've gone, I think my life is going to be better over there than it is over here, because a lot of those kind of liberal values and the kind of freedoms that
I
you
mean, yes,
get.
some of them, but some
Economic
of
as
them
well,
also just
obviously,
want,
as well.
economic. Some of them want to import their ancient feuds and just have
Well, I don't think
have
they want to import them, but I
nice
think that
trains.
things get kind of brought along with them, and you could even just talk about that to how less politically charged. Maybe this is not politically charged, but I remember in the 90s and early 2000s there was a lot of kind of inter-Balkan kind of rivalry in Australia. There were kind of like Croats and Serbs and etc. kind of like football things at the soccer and da da da. But that kind of ebbed away. Kind of thing, like it kind of peaked and then it troughed, and then I guess the question is like, well, what was successful in some ways about that and obviously it's also because the things died down in the Balkans as well, but we're in a space where in other cases it doesn't look like that's going to die down anytime soon. And so what's the
but I mean, I just
mechanism?
think that if we rediscovered a Christopher Hitchens era like robustness and
100%,
backbone in
100%.
simply saying
This
we
is
believe in equality, we believe that women and men are equal, we believe that gay people are the same, as it's deserve the same rights as everybody else. We deserve that. We believe that trans people deserve the right not to be discriminated against, but we don't believe that everybody else has to change all of their opinions because we're universalists. So we live and let live. We believe in giving each other the benefit of the doubt. We believe in that you don't have a right not to be offended. We believe in due process. We believe in treating everybody equally. If that was just the baseline insistence that people didn't feel ashamed of asserting, and any preacher or any media commentator who tries to hound people or punish people for disagreeing with their ideology or whatever has to come second to those principles. And just on your point about then I think we would have a much more robust conception of multiculturalism. And the reason why I bang on about this is not because I'm a right winger who doesn't like multiculturalism or Muslims. It's because I'm afraid that if middle Australians and middle Americans don't hear people on the centre left talking sensibly about this, then people who are illiberal and who are white 100%. Nationalists will gain
because they're
power.
the only people who will say it out
that's
loud.
Right. I mean, you can't have only Pauline Hanson and Stephen Miller being the people, and the Alternative for Deutschland and Nigel Farage and Marine Le Pen being the only people who are speaking honestly 100%. About there being a problem with illiberal religious fanaticism, or the integration of conservative communities into the multicultural mainstream. Just on your point about the UK and US, I actually think the US is a pretty good example of what I'm talking about, because they have responded to the fact that they're a melting pot with a real emphasis on America as a set of ideals. Flags everywhere. They're quite nationalistic. They're quite patriotic. They're quite militaristic. And they actually do work. I mean, having lived in New York for 12 years, I would say that is a great success story in multiculturalism. Muslim New Yorkers are great. They don't seem to have the problems that English or French or German communities have. They don't have entrenched economic disadvantage. They don't have increasing radicalization over the course of generations. So I think that is a lesson.
No, I think it absolutely is in part. I think my comment there was more about there is still significant social fragmentation in the US, but I think it's not. But I think what's kind of still holding it together in part is exactly what you're saying, this kind of much more muscular idea about who we are, why we're proud of it, why we're not all bad. Like I think we've essentially beaten ourselves up as Australians for the past like decade or two so much that it's kind of almost like there's nothing left there. And then we need to kind of find a way to do it, which isn't like the One Nation way of doing it, although I imagine that they're obviously part of the conversation, was like, no, actually we've achieved a huge amount of stuff in Australia. Actually, we're one of the, across all space and time, the last 10 or 20,000 years, this is probably like one of the like best places you could ever possibly be born and be living in. And we should be actually, as a kind of lefty who used to probably overly beat up on Australia as well, I think there needs to be some new kind of appreciation of like what it is that we have, because otherwise I think we're going to start to like lose it.
That's right. And I mean, we're not just a good place in terms of our prosperity, and I speak largely of the West here, not just Australia, but we're also among the least racist and least sexist and least bigoted places ever. And if that sounds silly to people because they think that white supremacy and colonialism, Go and talk to a Chinese family about Koreans. Go
You
and
know,
talk to any other
I lived in Asia for
race.
10 years, and I think Malaysia is probably one of the most racist places. Sorry, Malaysians.
I mean,
I
officially
went-
racist in Malaysia.
Oh,
They
no,
have actual quotas for
they do for
ethnic
Malays.
Malays
Yeah,
versus
yeah,
Chinese.
totally.
It's
I mean, I
actually
would get in
apartheid.
a-
It's real apartheid.
I would get in a taxi in Kuala Lumpur, and I get a Malay taxi driver. He started complaining to me about the Chinese. I get in a taxi with the Chinese. He started complaining to the Malays. The Indian taxi driver started complaining to me about the Chinese. I'm like, what about my face made you think that I care and I want to participate?
Why do I give a shit
in this conversation with you? And I was like, oh wow, okay. But but they're also have high levels of authoritarianism internally, as is Singapore, to kind of keep their multi-ethnic societies together. And they've done in some ways, well, in some ways you might say they've done a good job and a bad job, but they've done it at the expense of, and I'm kind of leading into if you're going to open up the
the Christmas
things as well. I think we obviously want to achieve a way to have that diversity without the authoritarianism.
We have a different kind of, they're not multicultural societies in the way that new Western countries are. They are traditionally multi-ethnic.
Well, no, because the Chinese
right?
only turned up in places like Malaysia and Singapore 150, 200, maybe a little bit, bit earlier.
That's true.
So there is a lot of conversation about
colonization.
Well, yeah, or like, and also because the British used the Chinese as kind of their like proxies or kind of like managerial class in a way, and they brought over the Indians as well into the society essentially. So they radically changed, say, Malay and Singaporean society.
Is that right? Did they? So when the Brits were in charge in India, and were they bringing Indians over as like the bureaucratic core? They?
100%. And then they brought more Chinese in. I mean, obviously there was historical links, and wasn't like there was none there before. But my understanding is it was largely the British who essentially made places like Malaysia and Singapore, which I guess were briefly also the same nation.
Yes.
Malaya, kind of multi-ethnic societies, and it was kind of forcibly done to the Malays. It wasn't kind of
it wasn't their choice. A natural.
No, it wasn't a natural. There was always some amount, talk about Islam in Indonesia, which arrives naturally through kind of Arab traders, and not that there was like huge amounts of Arabs that arrived, but there was but it was done in a very, very different way to Australia, and we have time now to kind of get it right. I mean, but the Min's thing is concerning to me because it basically says it's one or the other, and I don't think it has to be one or the other, but it doesn't mean that there also isn't an interplay and an interaction that we have to be kind of cautious around. And one of the big issues is that Tony Burke, who is basically you could almost call him the chief cop of Australia, as the Minister of Home Affairs, is the member for the electorate that has the highest number of kind of like conservative, potentially extremist kind of Islamic preachers, etc. within it. So if he's kind of starts to call out that sections of that community, because obviously it's a minority, then he's also gets himself into very, very big trouble as well. So I think he has a conflict of interest in a sense, because he can't kind of like say things out.
Well, the whole party, I mean, really, the whole Labor Party does, because it is an important part of their coalition to not piss off recent migrant communities. You can't remove. If migrants go to the Conservative Party in Australia, it'll be like the white working class in America going to Trump, which they
but
did.
I think in some ways they also largely do. I imagine like Chinese vote
a lot of them
more for
a lot
the
of them
Liberal Party than
increasingly
for
do.
the Labor Party.
I mean, on your point about like tolerance towards gay people, the funny thing. One of the funny things after the same-sex marriage referendum or plebiscite in Australia was watching all of my white lefty progressive friends and colleagues in journalism be shocked when they looked at the electorate maps of who voted no. They were like, all these like good left-wing, like Chinese Australian areas like voted against gay marriage, and then they voted against the Aboriginal referendum as well. And I'm like, Have you ever fucking met a recent Chinese Australian migrant? I love them as a community. They're hardworking. They're super pro family, but they're bloody conservative culturally.
Yeah.
They're not on your band. You
Yeah,
think
no,
you're
the
an
map,
ally?
the map of Sydney did not look like what if a kind of progressive had painted it. It looked like almost the exact opposite.
Exactly.
Because
They have
essentially
no
the rich white areas in the eastern suburbs and the lower North Shore
clue.
voted massively. Even Wentworth or eastern suburbs like about 80% or
Yes,
something,
absolutely.
kind of thing.
These
And it's
supposedly conservative
Yeah.
areas were pro-gay, and the supposedly progressive left-wing areas were anti-gay,
Yeah.
and they were all baffled. And it's
Yeah.
because of
no, I would have
cultural, it's
people on
because of
my
ethnic
my social media
cultural views.
suck at old white men, and I was like kind of going, the old white men,
Old white men were
the old
pretty
men actually
pro.
in the cities actually voted
Yes.
for this.
Yeah.
And it's the thing, so there's this deep confusion, and it's about, I don't know how you can untie this. I think you untie it through this kind of muscular universalism and just say, look, these are the values, and this is
Mm.
it. And we're not going to try and do all these carve outs for everyone. It's like this is it. There's a single set of rules, and these are the ones that we have, and we can have a kind of reinvigorated discussion to kind of reaffirm those fundamentals. But like this constant carving out of values for different kind of clusters of people just has to end, whether or not it's around ethnicity or sexuality or identity or whatever it is. They just have to kind of be over, as far as I'm concerned. And people go, well, that's nice for you, Andrew. You're like, it's cisgender, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, actually, it's going to be much nicer for everyone, I think, because all these twists and turns and kind of like finagling actually create a very discombobulated and confused society, which I think is like,
yeah, I mean, the other stupid thing about the move of saying, well, it's all very nice for you to not want hate speech laws because you're a white cisgendered middle-class male is, I'm sorry, the majority is always going to be the majority and will always conceive of the majority's biases as being the natural state of affairs.
well,
So if you believe, so lately we've had the ability for minorities to cow the majority into feeling sufficiently guilty that the minorities are able to assert the triumph of their own worldview.
This is a bit your conversation I think I watched a couple of weeks ago around was it with a Canadian? Sorry, now I'm kind of interjecting with that.
That's all right. I've been on holiday, so I banked a whole lot in advance, and I can't remember what just rolled out. But I'm sure it came up recently. But I mean, the point is just that, you know, be careful with being, if you're in a minority, be careful with flexing your muscle too hard about bossing everybody around about what they can and can't say. Because as we've just seen over the past few years in the United States, once you start playing that game, at some point, the majority is going to say, why does everyone else get to play the game of being proud of their identity and forcing us what to say, and we don't? Yeah,
people's generosity runs out. In some, and I think this, again, I'm trying to remember your guest that you had, that in some point, he was talking about that actually the kind of gay rights was downstream of like the kind of straight sexual revolution.
Yeah, no, he wasn't Canadian. He was.
I don't think he was Canadian anyway.
Oh, didn't you say he was a Canadian?
I did, but I don't know why. Because he seems so like such a nice guy.
No, he was. Yeah. Well, I think that's because he's from the UK or maybe Ireland. I apologize. I think it was Ronan McRae who was talking about the LGBTQIA plus threats.
This is how colorblind I am. I confused Irish people with Canadians.
I could be wrong. I could be misgendering it for all that I know. But yes, that's right. Something like gay rights is downstream of a whole lot of other beliefs. So you can't lobby in isolation for protections for gay people without also getting everybody else on board with the universal liberal principles. Yeah. Totally. Last point on racism and stuff. Like, because you mentioned Arabs going into Indonesia, I mean, the amount of, I have friends who live in, Bahrain and the UAE and now Saudi Arabia with a lot of money, and the extraordinary racism of well-to-do Arabs in the Gulf states towards not just South Asians who they bring in as functional slaves, Pakistanis and Bangladeshis, but also to other Arabs like the Palestinians. They think they're like scumbag terrorists who they don't want anything to do with.
I mean, I lived in Indonesia for 5 years. The amount of racism against black people is like insane. You just like Papuans would be.
The word in Arabic is still slave. You know that the word for a black person in Arabic is just slave. They're synonyms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and
It's extraordinary.
The thing we have
so
to
the
have
idea
some
that we're the
level
only
of,
cultures in the world who are like, oh, we're so racist and white
well, there was a
supremacy and like
massive Islamic slave trade.
it's like extraordinary. Yeah. And you know why there aren't black people in the Middle East anymore? It's because they, unlike the Western slave owners, they castrated all the slaves.
Wow.
So it was a longer and more vigorous slave trade than the transatlantic slave trade. But there are no descendants of those slaves.
That was so they couldn't intermix, or because in some
I
ways
don't
it's
know.
like
Yeah, why wouldn't you want to breed more of them?
Produce more
Yeah.
slaves.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway,
But yeah, I think
I think it's probably because they didn't want them escaping
Yeah.
and
I
sullying.
mean, I think the
blood
problem
of
is that
locals.
then what you have is kind of like people really on the right weaponizing or kind of using these arguments to essentially then articulate it, in some ways an actual version of white supremacy, and then you just don't get to have the nuanced conversation at all about, okay, comparatively, actually we're really not at the bottom of the table in terms of like the kind of like equalities, etc., that societies have been able to achieve for like their populations more broadly. How do you have that conversation without people go, well, that's just because you're and then, so again, back to the conversations being broken down, but which again I think is back to, I think the kind of more muscular universalism is linked to the kind of crisis of leadership in the cultural and other institutions more broadly, where people are too afraid to articulate a really strong set of values because they've been overly cowed by a kind of another narrative, which is about how absolutely awful all of our entire history.
Yeah, and we've also been sort of indoctrinated into a kind of relativism, which has made us leery about making any universal claims, haven't we? It's like I think there has just been a trend in, especially in the universities. I remember when I went to university, I wanted to study Asian history, but because I was at a fairly woke social justice university, UTS, which was fabulous for the production side of things, I learned a ton about editing film and television and radio production. But on the cultural and social studies side of things, I did most of my electives cross-institutionally at Sydney University, where they still, teach the old sandstone, and kind of illustrious. They still teach the canon. But at UTS, I was doing a class about Asian history, and it was all about like remaking and reinterpreting Asian history through the decolonized perspective of marginalized peoples. And my tutor was literally talking about Tiananmen Square and saying that from a Western perspective, that was an act of brutality. But if you look at it from a more holistic, communal Confucian collectivist perspective, it was an understandable reinforcement of like the collective will or something. And I put my hand up as like a snarky 19-year-old and was like, I'm sure that idea would come as great consolation to the people whose bones were being crushed by tanks as their final thought, that they were actually participating in a noble Confucian experiment. But I don't think that they would have seen it that way. And of course, she marked me with like a D- or something because I wasn't drinking the Kool-Aid. But that sort of worldview has made us incapable of just saying, running people over with tanks bad,
totally.
But also like about how terrible people are because of their gender or
underappreciation of
like
how different and diverse actually people across their own societies are, and just treating them as like all good or all bad. I mean, I've worked in Southeast Asia for almost 17 years and lived there for more than 10, and a lot of the work we would be doing would be, how the Buddhist majority in Thailand is kind of suppressing Muslim minorities in the south, working with LGBT activists in Indonesia who are kind of being repressed by like their own kind of extremely conservative governments, looking at kind of in some ways intra-imperial projects in Indonesia and places like West Papua, where essentially the Indonesians were colonizing Papua, and kind of, there's the world's biggest gold mine is there, etc. And kind of going, well, people are really complicated. Yes. And people like within their own domains, people are kind of trying to dominate other people. Like this is a kind of universal. And obviously in some ways historically there were too many caricatures about like, those people in Asia are like really, really bad and us
Oh,
white people
totally.
are civilized.
I mean, there was a whole regime of colonialism that we have to reckon with.
But then we kind of end up just going, well, let's just reverse the whole thing, and all these people were good and all these people were bad. And it's like, well, no, it's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to have that much more complicated conversation. But we've just gotten the kind of like the inverse conversation.
And that template, that oppressor versus oppressed, colonizer versus colonized, like privileged versus underprivileged, like victim versus oppressor kind of template.
Yeah.
When combined with this sort of squishy, self-recriminating, self-loathing, and inability to, proudly articulate Western values for fear of being seen to be a white supremacist or something, or an apologist for colonialism, when you transpose that onto a complicated issue like the Middle East, where Jews and Arabs and colonizers and locals have been banging around and tussling with each other for thousands of years, I think you get the degradation of the conversation that's happened over the past 2 years about Israel, where, Israel is a proxy for white colonialism. Palestinians are a proxy for the wholesome, oppressed, brown-skinned person. And all of the nuance of, the thousands of years of like since the kingdom of King David, and like all you just talk to actual the Ottomans. I mean, for a start, centuries of Turkish rule in the whole area.
Reparations.
Where's
the call for reparations?
Where is the call for reparations? Where's the call for the return? Where's the call for the right of return of Jews to Syria?
Oh, I thought you were going to say the right of return of like Brits to Norway or something because of the Vikings, or
sure. I mean, you could
like
certainly
this.
go there. So let's see what the leader of our state has said about multiculturalism and hate speech. Minns did say it's mostly run by Sky and Spectator. So you've been consuming right-wing news outlets. That's why you have
a diverse diet.
This is,
I actually really do think I have a diverse diet of news. I read lots of different things.
So this is just fact-checking Andrew's claim that Chris Minns has said that we either have to have free speech or multiculturalism.
Wow.
He said the following: I recognize, and I fully said from the beginning, we don't have the same freedom of speech laws that they have in the United States. And the reason for that is that we want to hold together a multicultural community and have people live in peace.
So he's basically saying there's an antagonism between, or he's not saying there's an outright one way or the other, but he's essentially saying, I would argue through that statement, that there's a compromise, there's a trade-off.
I mean, what's bizarre about what he's saying is that the United States, well, I was going to say it's more multicultural than Australia. It's technically not more. Australia has a higher immigrant population as a proportion of the population. But if you excluded if you excluded New Zealanders, Brits, Irish, and Southern Europeans, then America would be more multi-ethnic, I believe.
Yeah. Well, I think we're about 80% European, Australia. And, and 20% Asian and various other things. So Australia is more European than
America is. And so, I mean, the Chris Minns' comment is obviously false in the sense that certainly the parts of America that we would associate with the most, like the Northeast of the United States and the West Coast, are both more diverse and more committed to free speech.
Yeah.
Maybe he means that they're more violent as well, but...
Well, I think he is saying but
their violence is not their violence is not caused by multiculturalism. Well, there aren't the problem.
There's occasional. Violence. There was synagogue shooting, but there occasional. There's a synagogue shooting. Whatever that was, 3 or 4 years ago in Pittsburgh, I think.
Sure. And
there was one at a kind of black church, but then I kind of don't excuse them, but like every few kind of 4 or 5 years. It's quite regular.
It is not the main problem of violence. I mean, the main problem of violence.
Most of the gun violence is not inter-ethnic.
It's gangs and it's it's criminal networks, and to the extent that it breaks out of that,
a lot of it's inter-family as
well. It can be inter-family. It can also, it can also just be the lone shooter phenomenon of young white crazy males. I don't think it is. I want to lean on my solution, which is both more free speech and also a more robust commitment to enforcing our own ideals. And I would say that should even creep up to the line of being more strict on immigration issues. So,
Oh,
like,
totally.
you know, if there's an imam here who's not an Australian citizen who is consistently preaching ideas that run counter, and I don't know what you think about this from your perspective in defense of free
No,
speech.
this is where I
think
wouldn't
a
be an
person
absolutist.
should be booted out of the
Yeah,
country.
no.
if
So this
they're
is where I wouldn't be
consistently antithetical to liberalism and
Totally.
consistently preaching hatred against.
So this is where I would get in trouble
racism,
with probably some of
ethnicities.
my kind of US colleagues, where the line in the US is you really need to give non-citizens exactly the same free speech rights as citizens. I think Bondi has suggested to me that I don't agree on that, and actually to ensure.
But they were citizens.
No, one of them was.
The
One of them wasn't.
Was the dad not?
The dad wasn't.
Okay.
But Bondi not, I guess, has a kind of crucible or kind of way of seeing the kind of society as a whole, that and totally decoupling from the kind of Palestine question full stop, but like that there is a lot of preaching that is essentially invoking hatred against not just Jews, but like Australia full stop, and the West, and that in order to preserve free speech for the citizenry, who I think do get a privileged status because they're citizens and everyone else is a guest or on trial to be a citizen. That sounded quite wrong, but essentially kind of like going through the process. It's like I think you do have to be quite strict and say, okay, you're applying to be an Australian citizen. We have a higher bar for you than we do for people who are born here, or who have already been made citizens. And if it doesn't look like you're going to be making a positive contribution to this society, then you should go and find somewhere else.
I mean, the problem with even as you say that, my free speech instincts push back against it, because who's doing the deciding about whether or not the person is going to be constructive? If Tony Burke, the Home Affairs Minister, is making the decision, then Candace Owens doesn't get a visa to come to Australia.
But that's like that you elect the government essentially to do. That's how you essentially make that, you contribute to that decision.
Right. And but the libertarian answer is you shouldn't be elected. Nobody should have that power. And
I don't think the libertarians in Australia would suggest that.
Not that I know libertarians in Australia, but I mean the pure libertarian position would be it doesn't matter if the majority of people think that. I don't know.
But we essentially already have those rules. Those rules are already in place in Australia. There are already citizenship tests and behavior tests.
You have to be fit for, a character test. Yeah, you have to be a fit character.
You basically have a character test. Yeah. So it's not like this is new. This is exactly what's already.
I mean, how the hell did some of these preachers get past the character test? Like,
I know.
What are we doing? What is that all about?
Actually, I had a American girlfriend at the time who was banned from coming to Australia.
Really?
Yeah, because
you dated Candace Owens.
No. She was very much a lefty.
Right.
This is done in the early 2000s, that she had come over and we had done a lot of organizing around the World Economic Forum meeting that happened in Melbourne in the year 2000. This is when protesting the World Economic Forum and kind of corporate globalization didn't make you a conspiracy theorist, and it was kind of a kind of thing that people on the left did, was kind of like talk about corporate power and corporate globalization and And we did a whole bunch of organizing, basically rallying people to come to Melbourne for that kind of big demonstration that turned out to be quite militant. But this was actually before the demonstration, and we ended up, because he had a death in the family, kind of going back to the United States, which is how I ended up in the Northeast. And I know those places that we were talking about earlier. But she couldn't get back in to kind of come over and visit, because she basically was told that she didn't pass the character test because she might vilify sections of the community. In her case, her vilification would have been kind of essentially corporate CEOs that she would have been vilifying, right? Because she was basically talking about corporate power and all these kind of things. So she basically went in the same bucket with David Icke, kind of thing. And because we appealed it, we went to
it wasn't the threat to disturb the peace or something.
It might have been also. I'd have to go.
That would make more sense.
It was like 20 something. It was
like intent to disturb the peace.
Well, but it was all peaceful. It wasn't like a kind of like. But no, but one of the things
Seattle had just
because actually, exactly.
So
she had been at Seattle,
right? Okay.
Basically, and she was coming out and basically going.
For young people to whom that's
really
ancient
awesome
history, there was an uprising, a fairly routine I guess think of the summer of 2020 and the race riots. It was
way
like that.
calmer, way more
It was like
chill.
that, but against
People's-
corporate power
Yeah,
instead of
people
against police
smashed
and white
windows of
supremacy.
Starbucks and
Yeah.
and set a bunch of dumpsters on fire, and there was a bunch of tear gas and that. But it was
Mostly
way,
peaceful protests.
Well,
Mostly
yeah,
peaceful
I mean,
protests.
she was promoting peaceful protests, as was I. But it was way more chill than George Floyd. I would say
Okay.
100%. No one died.
No, I'm just
or
making an
anything like
analogy
that.
for young
I know,
people who
yeah,
don't know
sure,
what you're talking about.
Sure,
But,
sure.
you know, it was something that was on the news every night because there were flames coming out of shops and things. That's
Yeah,
my
I don't
recollection.
even if they know if they.
I mean,
set any
otherwise,
shops
why
on
is
fire.
it still in my memory when I was?
There was definitely
in
set.
school
They
and
definitely
it
set
was a long
dumpsters
time
on
ago.
fire.
Yeah, okay.
Kind of thing.
Okay.
So
Right.
dumpsters have rights too.
Uh,
But now I can't remember why.
just about the character test.
Character
of,
test. So
people
she
coming
did. So
in,
she
people not
didn't
being
pass the
allowed
character.
in.
So when
Yeah.
actually went all the way, and Philip Ruddock actually signed off
He was
on
the
her
minister for
saying
immigration.
that she wasn't allowed to come in,
Hmm,
kind of thing, because
fascinating.
we basically appealed it. So I say that in the sense that there are character tests, and I agree with you because I think she should have been allowed in.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, so who's actually getting to decide is totally a problem.
So-
but the point being, we are already deciding, and I don't think the way we're deciding has clearly been working.
No.
My girlfriend should have been let in, my ex-girlfriend. And
And
some of these other guys
certain
shouldn't have been.
Extremists, certain religious fanatics shouldn't. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess the place to wrap here, Andrew, would be the fact that part of the issue, looping this back to the Adelaide Writers Festival and like what you can be said and what can't be said and who should be platformed and who should be cancelled, is that we've come to a place where the instant tool that we reach for in the toolkit is shut out the opinion. Have the person uninvited.
Yeah.
Get them away from the public square.
Yeah.
That's what the Premier of South Australia apparently reached for when he allegedly put pressure on the festival to uninvite the Palestinian Australian activist and writer. That's what happened when she was uninvited. It is what she had tried to do and did do successfully to Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist, who was previously uninvited from the festival for holding the opposite opinion about Israel and Gaza. And it's like, we just need to broaden the toolkit so that when there's someone who has ideas that we think are beyond the pale, our response is what you suggested, which is, all right, instead of just giving them an open platform where they just blab as much as they want to their heart's content, put them in a forum where they're going to be challenged respectfully and there's going to be a real exchange of ideas, and flesh it out. Actually have the fight. Actually wrestle with the ideas.
And if they have bad
try
ideas, let them hang themselves on
That's
it.
right. And I think, I don't know how we got here, that we've gone from sort of having debates as genuine attempts to understand each other's point of view and flesh out a better, sort of use both opposing ideas to arrive at a superior conclusion than either of us could have come to on our own, to either just adversarial debate or platform or cancellation.
Yeah.
But like, we've somehow got to rejig that toolkit, and maybe we can do that at the same time as reinforcing the values of like liberal democracy and insisting that people not all be, it's
that
not
toolkit
legitimate.
has problems, but I think it's probably the best toolkit that we have.
That's right. Yeah. Anything else you want to flag for people, or where people can find you if they follow your stuff?
On Substack at Network Affects.
Network Affects.
Not FX. We were like,
Network
oh, you made a
Affects.
mistake. It's like it's a
You're
Network
like, it's
FX.
a pun. It's too clever.
I know it's a pun. It's too clever anyway. Network Affects with an A. .substack.com.
Fabulous. Thank you, Andrew. Andrew is a writer and a journalist and a digital activist. Also,
Liber-net. Yeah, digital civil liberties
freedom
initiative
and digital civil liberties. Thank you, Andrew. Great to
talk
talk
to
to you.
Thank you, Josh.